In this video I want to have a look at different things you can use to pick the guitar strings. As we know, to get the sound to come out of the guitar, we'll have to strike the strings, and it's the vibration of these strings that creates the sound. Now, there are different ways or different tools you can use to strike the strings, and they all have slightly different properties, different advantages, different disadvantages, and that's what I want to have a look at in this video. So what I want to do is have a look at three of the main ways you can pick the strings in a guitar. So what I want to do is have a look at plectrums here, which tend to be one of the most popular ways to play the guitar. I also want to have a look at using your fingers to play the guitar, which is also a popular way. And another thing I want to have a look at is one of these things, which is a thumb pick. These are maybe less common, but you still see them used a lot in blues and folk music for playing the guitar. So what I want to do is have a look at these three tools available for picking the strings and have a look at some of the advantages and disadvantages of them and the styles of music they're best suited to playing. Okay, the first thing I want to have a look at that you can use to strike the strings are plectrums, these things here. Now, plectrums are an extremely popular way to play the guitar, and what they are these sort of teardrop shaped pieces of plastic like this. And they come in different thicknesses. So if you see this orange one here, it's a relatively thin one and quite bendy and flexible like that. And if you look at this white one, it's basically rigid like this. And what sort of thickness and rigidity a plectrum you want is really down to your own personal preference and your playing style. So like I said, plectrums are extremely popular and are used a lot just you know, in sort of rock, metal music, and they're used a lot for strumming the guitar. So let's have a wee look into them and see how they play. Okay, so to use a plectrum, what you do is you grab it between your index finger and thumb like this, and what you do is you get this picky bit sticking out the bottom, and this is what you use to hit the strings with, like so. And that's basically how you play with a plectrum. Now, like I said, these are really popular, and probably the majority of guitarists actually play with a plectrum. So let's have a wee look at some of the advantages and disadvantages of them. So what are some of the advantages to playing with a plectrum? Well, one of the main advantages is that because you're hitting the strings with a piece of hard plastic, what you get is you get quite a loud, clean and strident tone coming out of the guitar like this. So if that's what you're wanting for your music, then a plectrum might be a good way to go. Another thing about a plectrum is, and this might be a bit hard to describe, is that it is a single picking instrument for doing it. I mean, if you're playing with your fingers, you know, you have, say, 4 fingers that all have to be controlled independently. With a plectrum, you only have this pick realistically. Most of the time, that's all you'll be using. So all you have to do to play the notes is master moving this pick across them. So in some ways, using a plectrum can be a more accessible way and an easier way to pick the strings on the guitar. Now, another advantage to playing with a plectrum is that they are wafer thin like this. And this may not seem obvious as to why this is an advantage, but if you're playing with a guitar where the strings are close together, you'll soon know why it's an advantage. Now, if you hit a string on a guitar, it vibrates and moves like that, like, you know, and you can see the vibration here. Now, if you're coming into the adjacent string, You want something thin to get in there, because what you don't want to happen is it clipping the string like that. You can hear it here. You get that buzzing noise like that on the string. So a thin picking implement like this is really good for getting in the strings like that without catching the adjacent vibrating strings. So that's another advantage of using a plectrum. Another advantage of it is that you can move it at speed quite easily as well. I mean, you can pick with, say, downstrokes or upstrokes, like so, but just by moving the wrist just a small amount, you can oscillate back and forward between up and down strokes, which makes a pick very good for playing fast single note runs or playing like tremolo notes on the guitar like this. Or like so. So again, if these are some of the sounds that you're wanting, or this is the style of music you're playing, a pick might be a good option for you. Another thing that I find it quite good with is if you're just doing, you know, you're just strumming chords like, you know, the way you move your wrist and the way the pick flows across the strings is really, really good for strumming. So if you're playing like a backup piece where you're just playing the chords in the background, singing along, a plectrum might be a really good option for you. Now, like I said, they come in different thicknesses, and I think that the thickness that you want really just depends on your personal preference and what feels good for you. You know, some people say that, oh, thinner picks are better for fast note runs or such like, but that's something that you would have to experiment with yourself. But there's some of the advantages to playing with a plectrum. So what are the disadvantages of playing with a plectrum? Well, the main disadvantage to playing with a plectrum is that you're primarily only hitting it with the plectrum itself. So you can only really address it one string at a time, or one strum at a time, you know, like that. You know, if you want to start playing multiple strings, plectrums become problematic. So I mean, if you take something that's played with fingers like this, it's nigh on impossible to do that using a plectrum. For most part, when you're playing with a plectrum, you will only be playing it one note at a time. I mean, like I said, you can play through multiple strings like this. Or what you can do is you've still got these two fingers free here, so you can bring these in like this and try and do it like that, but it just doesn't feel good when you're doing it. It feels, your hand shape feels wrong, it feels very unnatural the way you're doing it. And not just that, to hold the plectrum, you're having to take out your index finger as well, and when you're finger picking, your index finger's probably one of your primary picking fingers. So plectrums are really not much good for any sort of fingerstyle guitar, probably hence why it's called fingerstyle and not plectrum style guitar. Anyway, so for multiple notes at the same time, plectrums tend to fall down. One other downside to a plectrum is that, and this is more a personal thing, it's basically, it feels like an unnatural extension. I mean, it's a bit of plastic that you hold like this, and when you're hitting the strings, it's the plastic hitting the strings. Whereas when you're picking them with your fingers, you know, you can feel the string on your finger. And I feel when you can feel the string like that, you have a lot more control and sensitivity as to how you play. I don't think you get that to the same extent with a plectrum. Okay, the next thing I want to have a look at is playing with your fingers. Now, this is common in classical guitar, flamenco guitar, and a lot of blues and folk guitarists play with their fingers as well. So it's quite a commonly used way of picking the strings. So before we go and have a look at some of the advantages and disadvantages, how do you actually play with your fingers? I know that sounds a bit trite, you know. I mean, you would think, oh, you just hit the strings with your fingers, but it's actually a lot more complicated than that. When you're picking, there are a lot of misconceptions about, you know, how you pick with your fingers. The main misconception is that you have to have fingernails like talons. You don't. You are not totally playing with your fingernails when you're picking with your fingers. What you're doing when you're picking with your fingers, optimally, the best way to play is that you hit the string with the fleshy part or the tip of the fleshy part of your finger, and then the nail brushes across the string, and that's what gives it that clean note. So if you hit it just with the fleshy part like this, I mean, the tone's okay when you do it like that, but it is a wee bit muted, it is a wee bit soft, the tone. But if you hit it with a tip and let the nail catch the string as it's going through, what you get is a far cleaner, louder sound. So ultimately that's what you would be looking for when you're picking with your finger. You'd want slight amount of length on your nails, just so it just slightly catches that it goes through. I mean, you can make a whole video about this, and it's dependent on the types of strings and everything like this. But as a general rule of thumb, in terms of nail length, what you're looking for is you're looking for it roughly to be in line with the fleshy tip of your finger. You know, you'll see that this fingernail's roughly in line with the fleshy tip of my finger here. But a lot of this has to do with the angle you put your hand at and how you address the string. So often you may need your thumbnail a wee bit longer because of the angle you play it. So it's something that you have to work at to find your optimal sort of nail length for the sound and the playing style you want. Okay, so what are the main advantages to playing with your fingers? Well, the main advantage, and it's an absolutely huge one, is that you have now potentially up to 4 picks playing at once. And this is a huge thing. Instead of with a plectrum, you just have one picking implement going and maybe another one if you bring in another finger. With your fingers, you have up to 4 picking implements going at once, which offers you just far more scope for playing the guitar, you know? Like this. And realistically, if you want to be playing classical, flamenco, and a lot of, you know, fingerstyle blues and folk music, the fingers are really the only way you can go. A plectrum is no use. So playing with your fingers offers really, you know, unrivaled flexibility when you're playing and opens up so much scope with the guitar. Another advantage to playing with your fingers is that it's actually your fingers that are touching the strings, so you can feel the strings and it feels very natural when you're playing. You know, when you're hitting the strings, you know, you can feel them on your fingers, and I think this gives you a greater level of control, especially over, say, the volume that's coming out of them, you know, and how you play it and how you craft the note. I think you just have a far more natural feel and more control over each note you're playing when you can feel it on the tips of your fingers. So what are some of the disadvantages to playing with your fingers? Now, from what I've described earlier, you may think, oh, I just want to play with my fingers. You know, it's the most versatile way. I get a sort of natural feedback through the strings, through my fingers. You know, that's the best way to play. And in a lot of ways it is, but it does have some downsides as well. And I think the most obvious downside is it's actually quite tricky and it actually has quite a steep learning curve. At its most basic level, you know, anyone can just hit the strings like that with their fingers and get a sound. So in that way it is accessible. But if you want to start, you know, playing finger style guitar, like this, it is a steep learning curve to doing it, and it can feel very frustrating at the start. It can feel like you're not making much progress, you know, and it can be hard sometimes to continue with this, you know, it can be hard to progress sometimes. But the only thing I can say is just stick with it. You will get there eventually. Just keep practicing, you know, with your fingers. So don't dismiss finger picking, but also don't be complacent that this is an easy way to play either, because it can be difficult if you're wanting to play more advanced music. What are some of the other downsides then to playing with your fingers? Well, one of the downsides that I find is that you actually need a good bit of distance between the strings on the guitars. Like I said, your plectrum is wafer thin, so it can get in that gap there and hit the strings. And if you've got another string vibrating next to it, you can easily get into that gap and hit that string. When you're playing with your fingers, it is very easy to clip adjacent strings that are vibrating, you know. So if I pick the bottom string here and then try to pick the next one up with my thumb, and if you notice here, I have quite a chubby fat thumb here, so it is quite an issue for me. You know, so if I hit that one and then I come in, you hear it there hitting the top of the string, and you don't want that. I mean, it's not the end of the world, but you don't really want that sound. So for you to do that, you have to be extremely accurate when you're playing, and that can be tricky. You know, and it's the same for all fingers. Your fingers are far thicker than a plectrum. So there's always this danger, unless your strings are extremely wide apart, you know, that you're going to clip adjacent vibrating strings when you're doing it. And that means that accuracy has to be very, very precise. And again, this leads back to what I was saying about it being a very steep learning curve, you know, because you have to be so very accurate with what you're doing. Now, again, another downside is this idea maintaining your nails. You know, you really have to have the optimum nail length to do it, and that can be awkward, you know. Like I said, they don't have to be long, but a wee bit out, or if they're not shaped correctly, you can start like catching the strings with your nails, or you're getting too much of the fleshy part on it. And that can be awkward because you do have to sort of maintain them. There is some give and take. They don't have to be perfect to the thousandth of a millimeter, you know, realistically. So there is some give and take, but you will notice a difference if you cut your nails or let them grow too long. So one of the downsides is just you have to maintain your nails. It's not as easy as just picking up a plectrum and going like that with it. And that kind of leads into what I was saying about, you know, needing some relief from the strings as well. You know, if your nails are too short, what you'll instinctively start doing is using more of the fleshy part of your finger, which will give you more chance of hitting adjacent strings and more ringing. So that's another downside. You really have to be very accurate with this style of playing, you know, and you realistically have to keep your nails at just a good length as well. Another disadvantage people seem to find when playing with their fingers is they can find it awkward playing chords. So if you're just playing chords as an accompaniment and just strumming them out, some people can find this quite awkward with their fingers. Now there are different ways you can do this, but again, it's not as quickly accessible as doing it with a plectrum, which is quite easy. I mean, what I tend to do is I tend to sort of form my index and thumb like this, and, you know, hit it with a sort of back of each finger for playing upstrokes and downstrokes like this, you know. It's kind of like playing with a plectrum, but without the plectrum there, and that's how I do it. And there are other ways you can do this. You could just use your thumb like a pick, like this. I don't particularly like that way, and I find it tends to drag and catch the strings. You know, and flamenco guitarists have umpteen ways that they can strum the strings as well, you know. Like so, and umpteen other ways. So yes, you can definitely do chord strumming with using your fingers, and there are a lot of different ways you can do it, and arguably there's quite a lot of versatility at doing it. But again, it's not quite as accessible as using a plectrum. It'll require more practice, and it could actually require, you know, you just developing a sort of personalized ad hoc way of doing it like I do it, for whatever feels comfortable. So again, strumming can be done, but again, it's not quite as accessible, and the learning curve to get what you want might not be quite as easy as, say, as if you were playing with a plectrum. Okay, the last thing I want to talk about is this thing here, which is a thumb pick. And you'll see this used a lot in folk and blues fingerstyle guitar. And what it is, it's a pick, and it goes over your thumb like this, and you use it for picking the notes where you would use your thumb. So why would you want to use one of these thumb picks? Well, you'll see them used a lot in blues and folk music when playing this sort of fingerstyle guitar. And ultimately, you would be using them if you were playing fingerstyle guitar. So you would be using this thumb pick for the bass notes and your other fingers for playing the melody notes. So the question is, why would you bother with this? Why would you not just use your thumb? Well, there are a number of advantages to using these thumb picks. From the previous section, like I said, when you're finger picking, if you've got the strings are narrow and close together, it's very easy to catch the strings, especially with a thumb, and create this nasty buzzing, ringing sound. This thumb pick is really thin, so you can play strings like that, and you don't catch the adjacent string like that. So that's one advantage to doing that. Another advantage to using them, again, is it's hard plastic you're using, so it is going to make those bass notes ring out a lot more. Like so. Another advantage is that it gets over the strumming issue. Like I said, when you're playing with your fingers, strumming chords and that can feel a bit awkward, you know, and there's loads of different ways you can do it, but it can sometimes be a bit awkward getting a technique that's good for strumming. Because you have this thumb pick, you've basically got a strumming implement right there, so it gets over the strumming problem. So again, it seems like a really good option. It's like finger picking, so you get all the versatility you do when you're picking with your fingers, but it overcomes some of the problems you get with picking with your fingers. So it sounds like a really good option, but again, there are disadvantages. Okay, so what are some of the disadvantages to playing with a thumb pick? Well, the biggest disadvantage to me is the angle that you're attacking the strings at. So take this off. When I'm picking with my fingers, my thumb's at about a 45-degree angle to the strings. Like this, and it feels good, and the distance for the other fingers from the strings feels good, and the angle attack for the other fingers feels good. When I put this on, what I find myself doing is, I find myself wanting to bring my thumb round this way, you know, to get the thumb pick to hit. I mean, I could have it at 45 degrees, but it doesn't seem to pick the strings very well. And it seems to catch and drag the strings. And I find that if I bring my hand around, these fingers are too flat to the strings and they don't pick them as well, and everything just feels a bit off and awkward when I'm using it. Also, because it's got such a projection so far out the thumb like this, what I find is that the thumb's actually sitting too high to the strings, and again this makes me want to put these other fingers at an unnatural angle, and everything just feels a bit off and wrong when I'm doing it, and I don't feel that I can get the same speed and clarity when I'm playing when using one of these things. Now it's probably because I've just always used my fingers, so this just feels unnatural to me. You know, and I think if you started out playing with one of these, you know, it would all be okay. But you know, I'm not sure either. I mean, you never see classical guitarists using them. You never see flamenco guitarists using them. So, I mean, there are reasons why they don't use them and continue to use their fingers. And for me, it just feels the wrong, unnatural angle at my hands at when addressing the strings. Another more minor disadvantage is, like I said, with a plectrum, is it feels unnatural. It's not your own finger hitting the string. You don't get the same kind of feedback from the string, so I don't feel like you can get the same control over the note you're playing with it. But that's more of a minor downside. Other downsides, what I found is that it's extremely tight on your thumb, and if you're hitting the strings quite hard, it can start to drag around a wee bit. I mean, apart from cutting the circulation off in your thumb because it's so tight, I can feel that it can drag and pull and move just a bit too much. Again, that's something you won't get with your fingers. But these may be minor things, you know, you find when playing with it. But, you know, me personally, I don't like these things. I find them unnatural. I find them awkward to use. And I don't see any real need for them. But like I said, a lot of people do use them, especially in folk and blues music. So if you know it's something you want to give a go, then give it a try, and you may find it works for you. Okay, so that's a brief overview of some of the ways you can pick the strings on the guitar. I haven't looked at everything. I mean, you also get like finger picks that you can put on these fingers that are like talons that you can pick the strings with. You see banjo players play with them. I don't like them. You don't usually see guitarists playing with them, so I haven't covered them in this video. But of the ones I have covered, you know, I hope I've been able to show some advantages and disadvantages to each. And, you know, which one you use will probably depend on your playing style and whatever you're comfortable with. Me personally, I just like playing with my fingers. I feel it gives, you know, the most versatility, it gives the most feel of the instrument and the best feedback from the instrument as well, and the most control when you're playing. You know, if you're struggling with some aspects, you know, when playing with a thumb, you know, maybe getting too much ringing on the strings, or you're not being able to pick the string good with your thumb, try using a thumb pick maybe. If you're finding that playing with your fingers is too much of a steep learning curve, maybe you should try with a plectrum, especially if you're playing, you know, more rock, metal music, or if you're doing a lot of chord strumming. So it really is just horses for courses here, you know, and it's whatever you're playing, whatever you feel comfortable with. Like I said, my personal preference is playing with my fingers, but it's certainly worth giving all these different methods a try and seeing which one works best for you.